So just as way of introductions, my name is Justin Razor. I'm the Senior Account Executive for Nutanix, who is responsible for Native American tribes. And that's really anything kind of under the Native American tribes umbrella. That is tribal government, tribal gaming and casinos, tribal enterprises, tribal healthcare, IHS specifically, and then also Bureau of Indian Education and Bureau of Indian Affairs. So really kind of anything that is under that umbrella for tribes. Joining me today as well is Joanna Kershaw, who is an inside account executive with Nutanix, who apparently is in the Millennium Falcon. Eric Katelfu, who is a senior sales engineer. Bill Hackley, who's the systems engineer manager for the civilian team at Nutanix. And then Madeline, who is our sales development rep, who probably reached out to a good majority of you to, make you aware of this session. So that's everybody who kind of supports the tribes at Nutanix. Any type of questions or, if anything is of interest today that you want to have a deeper conversation about, feel free to reach out to us individually, or on this slide here, you'll see that there's a tribes@nutanix.com email address that you can send an email to request assistance with, and that'll go to all of us. Whoop, I think I skipped ahead. Oh, no, I didn't. A little bit of a delay. All right. So I'm not sure how many people are actually very familiar with Nutanix as, a vendor. This may be the first time you're hearing of us, or maybe you've heard of us kind of in passing, or, perhaps you've looked at us in the past. But, just to give an idea of the competitive nature, where we're at kind of in the market for HCI specifically. So Nutanix started as a hyperconverged infrastructure company about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago now. And it was really kind of a vertical that Nutanix created out of, traditional three-tier architectures, and really wanted to create something that was easier to use, more fluid, taking a lot of the complexities out of kind of the day-to-day management of traditional architectures that were used or have been used in data centers across the world. So as a market leader, Nutanix is about 52.6% of the overall, landscape of HCI. And then there are other players in this field as well. One of the other known ones that, perhaps you're familiar with is VMware. They also have an HCI offering. However, again, Nutanix is the dominant leader in this market space. It's a market space that we really created, and it continues to expand and grow year over year. And then just as a reference or something to note, we are also very tied in with multiple OEM vendors. So, more specific to probably the people on this call today, Dell EMC, Lenovo, and Hewlett Packard, or HPE, are all OEMs that we have relationships with. So we're selling and implementing Nutanix with those hardware providers. In some of the EMEA markets, Fujitsu, you may see, but I can't say I've seen much of that in the United States, really in any market. So, why are you here today? Everybody was, I think, intrigued or interested, or perhaps has been trying to gather as much information about, virtual desktops or work from home or work from anywhere type solutions. And obviously, one of the big driving factors in recent history is COVID-19 and the pandemic that kind of came from that. So a lot of people have had to shift to a different way of, providing end user access to, their customers or their users. And that's why EUC and VDI and desktop as a service have really become kind of, big technology moves within the last year. It's now easier than ever to really kind of build out and scale out these workloads as well for working from anywhere. Previously to Nutanix, I was actually an architect and a consultant for VMware, and where I was implementing very large scale VDI solutions. So I would go anywhere from janitorial supply companies and implement them all the way up to some of the largest federal customers and credit card companies in the United States, where we're implementing VDI solutions. And that usually took an army of consultants to go out and do and work with the customer and stand up the solution. And, it was tens, if not hundreds, thousands of dollars of actual just services to implement these solutions. That has kind of gone away. It is much easier with solutions like Nutanix and some of the other products that are out there to actually stand up VDI infrastructures relatively quickly. One of the other reasons for EUC is, especially within the tribal space that we're seeing, is providing secure access to end users. One of the big concerns that perhaps isn't talked about enough within the tribal space is, kind of the attack surface that exists for ransomware and malware type of attacks. So figuring out ways to provide secure access to the end users within the tribal space is very important, and something that a lot of tribal organizations have really started to, look at, and something they desire to really make sure access into their environments is secure, and so data is not escaping. And then also, as we'll talk a little bit about today, is the private versus public cloud, inflection point. Where does it make sense? Does it make sense to have everything in the public cloud, desktop access, and then, within the public cloud, it's reaching back into internal access on your on-premise resources? Or does it make sense to run just everything private? Or in some cases, does it make sense to run a little bit of both in a hybrid approach? So these are the things that organizations, as they're going through this journey of developing and implementing some type of end user computing strategy, these are the things that are kind of the table stake things for it. Quickly scale, enhance security, SaaSify legacy apps, or making legacy apps available to the end users, and then really work from anywhere on any device. And as someone who's been in the EUC space for, I would say, 10 plus years now, from consulting, now working at Nutanix, the work from anywhere on any device thing was kind of I don't want to say niche, but it was always like, oh yeah. I mean, iPads or Chromebooks or whatever it is, that's cool that you can do it. But I don't really think it's until the last year for the pandemic where that became actually a reality. A lot of my tribal customers, they're either supplying infrastructure end user devices to their tribal members, or the people that are working for the tribe, and in some cases they are actually doing it on devices such as Chromebooks, or even if they have an iPad tablet, being able to actually deliver that desktop experience to those users, I think in the last year has really became more of a normal thing than kind of the like, oh, that's kind of a cool little niche thing that you can do, but it's really come to its own within the last 6 to 9 months. And other outcomes for virtual desktop infrastructures that are important is the time to spin these up. The average time to set up a virtual desktop is about 4 to 6 minutes, and then to deploy the applications is 1 to 2 minutes. This is huge, considering that a physical end user device or desktop, can take days and weeks sometimes to implement and deploy for end user. So you're able to your teams are able to much more rapidly deploy these solutions to end users. However, those are being the things that organizations really desire, and what really entices them for EUC. Some of the roadblocks that people run into are long deployment times, large upfront investments, limited scalability, and unhappy end users. So long deployment times, as I talked about in my past life of being a consultant, we would go in and do an engagement to stand up VDI, and it would take months at some points to get them to the point where they were ready just to pilot the environment, not necessarily even start consuming it for their end users. Large upfront investments, it used to be a activity of essentially determining what you needed to purchase, but not really just purchase for their near term. Look at what you were purchasing for like 5 years out, and determining like, okay, we want to do, we'll say 1,000 users, but we're only going to start with 200 users in the first, couple years, and the end goal is to get to 1,000 users. What would typically happen is organizations would be forced into purchasing everything from, that 5-year end mark up front, and then hoping to grow into it, which caused really horrible returns on investments, caused VDI projects to really kind of fail, because it just, from a accounting perspective, it didn't look like a really wise investment. And that was due to that upfront investment. Limited scalability, those same systems that organizations were purchasing and buying all up front, if they blew past kind of that 1,000 user mark, being able to build and scale out those environments that provided, kind of predictable performance was a challenge. They may have ran their first 1,000 desktops great, but as they started to kind of tack things onto it, things started to really run very sluggish. And ultimately with EUC, what all that ends up kind of leading up to is unhappy end users. There is nothing else in my experience with architecting and implementing, VDI solutions or end user computing that will make a project fail hard and fast if end users aren't thrilled with the experience. If they're not getting what they had when they had a physical desktop on their desk or at home, and what they're getting with the VDI solution, that's usually when you have, your end users at your office door with pitchforks and they're blowing up your help desk line because it's running slow, or it's the performance kind of goes up and down. These are all things that are challenges to typical EUC deployments. Next slide. Oh, what am I saying? Next slide. I can next slide it. Sorry, Bill. Maybe. It kind of froze. There we go. So those are all the challenges, all the things that people are interested about, end user computing and the solutions that we're talking about today. Why Nutanix? Why is Nutanix something that, perhaps your organization should be looking at or considering? And really, Nutanix started effectively our journey with VDI. A lot of it had to do with VDI was something that organizations were more apt to kind of take a chance on new technologies with. But what really, enticed organizations was just the performance and the ease of use that Nutanix provided for end user computing environments. So we've been doing EUC for about 10 years. We have thousands of customers and millions of desktops, virtual desktops deployed throughout the world. So, this is is a bread and butter workload for us. We've been doing it and really kind of not only doing it, but pushing the envelope of what's possible with EUC for the last few years. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and Bill's going to get a little bit more into kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about today and kind of distinguishing between your traditional VDI deployments, internal, and then kind of where things have headed for the last couple of years, which is desktop as a service, and kind of explain the differences and the nuances between those.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, by way of introduction first, Justin already said, so I'm Bill. I lead up the engineering team for federal healthcare here at Nutanix. So for federal healthcare, just like Justin said, that's obviously tribes and everything tribal, but it's also the Health and Human Services, and it's the VA. So it's a pretty large area, and a lot of happy customers using Nutanix. From a history standpoint, I'm similar but different than Justin, right? So while he was doing VDI using VMware, I was, most of my career was doing VDI Citrix. So for people that know the VDI space, that's like two competitive football teams, right? That just kind of hate each other. So you either are a Citrix VDI person or a VMware VDI person. And also, by the way of sports, anyone that's a football fan out there, Justin's a big Buffalo Bills fan. I'm a big Baltimore Ravens fan. They're actually playing each other in the playoffs this weekend. So we have that going on as well. But also, as we get into this, I know everyone says that presents like, please ask questions, but I'm definitely going to, say it, please ask questions, right? I do these kind of presentations a lot, and it's always more fun when it's interactive. So, you can come off mute and ask a question if you feel more comfortable. Right in the chat, I have it on my other screen, so I'll try to look over and, keep an eye out for chat questions, but please ask away. It makes it way more interesting. And then if we have time at the end of this, I do have a quick little demo that I can show off. So hopefully we end up with time and I don't get too long-winded in my conversation. So in order to kind of talk about what Nutanix does for EUC or for VDI, we kind of have to start at where Nutanix started, kind of as a company. And if you look at the left side here, this is what a lot of data centers look like. Right. So ever since the advent of virtualization, really, ever since VMware virtualized the first server, this layer of complexity has been going on in the data center. Right. So in order to do virtualization with a hypervisor like VMware, you had to load that hypervisor right onto physical servers. But then if you wanted those virtual machines to be able to move from server to server to server, you had to then have the actual virtual hard drive stored on shared storage. So a SAN, if you will. So what this did is it added a lot of complexity, right? So before VMware, there really wasn't such a thing as a storage engineer, right? There was storage inside servers and you just leverage that. But this whole new kind of industry was born out of this. But what this also means is just complexity, right? Because at the very top, your layer for the hypervisor might be VMware and your servers might be Dell, and then your storage network fabric might be Cisco, and your SAN at the bottom might be NetApp, right? And that's a lot of different interoperability, a lot of different vendors, a lot of different consoles. But the other big thing and where this ties into VDI is just scaling. So if you kind of look on the left side again and you say, okay, I'm going to build out a VDI environment, I'm going to build it for 2,000 users. Well, you have to do a lot of research and figure out from a performance standpoint, how many physical servers do I need to buy to support 2,000 users? How many processor cores, how much memory, all that. But then on the storage side, you have to make sure you have enough IOPS, so enough storage performance, enough storage capacity. And the problem is if you miss the mark, it's really, really bad, right? So if you figure out that you built this 2,000 user environment and you got to user number 1,500 and everything just starts to slow down, what that means is that you're now buying a parallel environment. You're going out and buying exactly what you bought before. So it doesn't scale very well. It scales in huge kind of monolithic sizing. So what Nutanix did is they looked at what was going on in public cloud. So, love or hate public cloud, there's a lot that public cloud does right. And a lot of it is just how they have web scale architecture. So what Nutanix did is we took all that on the left and we consolidated down to node-based cluster infrastructure. So we took away that separate shared storage layer that you see at the bottom, and we went back to the days of storage should be inside the physical server. So, a server or a node always has compute, it has memory, but now we add storage to it and we leverage that storage. And we put all those different nodes into what we call a cluster, and then we can aggregate all that storage together and really deliver enterprise grade performance and kind of storage features, but we can do it with software, right? So now, again, every server, compute, memory, storage, aggregate all that storage together, and all the goodness that you want out of enterprise storage, you still get with this solution. But the other benefit is that you get scaling, right? So if you figure out through testing that one single node of Nutanix can support, let's say 100 users. Well, that means if you want to get to 1,000 users, it's just simple math. If you want to get to 2,000, it's just simple math, right? You just keep adding these nodes into your environment. And adding nodes with Nutanix is a lot different than what you see on the left. So as a person that spent a lot of my career doing consulting, that left side is usually weeks worth of setup, right? It's figuring out, getting that storage environment in, getting the SAN in, getting it working with the storage network and, layering on the hypervisor, building all your VMs, it's weeks. With Nutanix, we can spin up a simple cluster, whether it's 3 nodes or 100 nodes, in a matter of hours. It is much, much different. So within a single day, you're already creating VMs and you're already building your virtual desktop environment. And then if you start with, say, a 3-node cluster and you want to go to 5, it's, an hour plus, right? Just to add a node into the cluster. So very easy to scale. The other thing to kind of point out here is that while this slide has a picture of our branded hardware, we are a software company. So ultimately, we ride on top of commodity hardware. So whether it's Dell, as Justin said earlier, HPE, Lenovo, we are software that rides on top of physical servers. And I've actually just looked at the questions. Okay, so far it's being answered. So I'm going to move on here. So I did mention about the console reduction. And while this might seem trivial, it's actually huge for someone that is a day-to-day admin, right? You don't have to live in these multiple consoles. What you see on the left would be like a VMware console and a storage console and, network fabric console. For us, everything's consolidated. So you manage the hypervisor, you manage the storage, the network. I mean, absolutely everything is just inside of our one easy to use console. And if we're talking about Citrix as the VDI solution, we integrate right into the console Citrix too. So if anyone out there is familiar with Desktop Director, which is an amazing help desk tool used for troubleshooting, we integrate right into Desktop Director, but we give more insight. So inside Desktop Director, you have the ability to say, hey, a user called me yesterday and they said, or today, and said that yesterday at 3 o'clock, their performance was slow. Well, as a Citrix only admin, you only have access to what director tells you. So you can look back in time and you can say, well, it looks like the server you were on, the processor looked fine, the memory looked fine. So in their view, it looks fine. But with Nutanix, we add even more analytics in all the way down to the storage, to the network, to everything. So now you get that view that you can say yesterday at 3 o'clock, oh, actually, it looks like that storage was a little bit slow for some reason. And normally you wouldn't get that without talking to a different team, a storage team, a network team. And then ultimately, Nutanix is a complete platform. So what I showed you in that first slide, where we consolidated all that kind of on-premises infrastructure and made it easier, we've gone even further now, right? So we're all about taking the goodness of what is public cloud and trying to bridge the gap between public and private cloud, so a hybrid cloud, if you will. So even people that want to run purely in public cloud, we can help you get there. We can help you, again, take all that goodness and run it on premises. So even down to microservices. So one thing that people love about public cloud is that within a single click, I can have a database. Within a single click, I can have a file server solution, an object solution. So we brought all that into our platform. So we are one platform that spans multiple clouds. So, whether that's, you're using a little bit of Azure, a little bit of AWS, GCP, all within one console of Nutanix, you can, migrate workloads, you can create databases, all of that. Now, so now that we kind of set the stage about Nutanix and kind of what we offer, now we're going to get into the actual EUC part of this, the actual virtual desktop part. And we're going to divide this into two categories. So I'm going to first cover the kind of like the traditional virtual desktop model. And what that really means is, you're going to the major players out there. You're going to the Citrix, the VMware. You're looking at their virtual desktop solution, and you want to do kind of what's now called kind of traditional VDI. And we'll talk about what we do to really accelerate that, make that better. Time to value, performance, all that. And then at the end, we're going to talk about moving to more of a desktop as a service offering. So whether the desktops are actually running in a public cloud like Azure or AWS, or you still want to run your desktops on premises, but the control plane, kind of all the management side of it, is a software as a service offering. So that's where we're going to get next. And then again, if we have time, we'll do a demo of the desktop as a service offering. All right, so talking about what we do for traditional VDI. So the number one thing is that we're all about choice, right? So at Nutanix, I said earlier that we are hardware agnostic, right? So we run on HP, Dell, all that. We're also hypervisor agnostic, and we are VDI broker agnostic, right? So ultimately, we are the infrastructure that powers VDI, but doesn't lock you into really any choice. So we'll dive into that. We're going to talk about just kind of different pricing models out there. The scaling part is a huge part of it. Yeah, and then we'll then talk about all the different components that really take VDI to the next level with Nutanix. So getting into kind of the choice side of it, right? I mean, I've kind of almost belabored this at this point, but it really does come down to not being locked in, right? So there's certainly other virtual desktop solutions out there that only support one hypervisor, only support one broker. We are always about flexibility, and if that flexibility even extends into the cloud, right? So if you want to then span or burst into, say, AWS or burst into Azure, we can help you get there as well, right? And make the management side of that really, really easy. And then from a license model, the way we license our software, because ultimately we are a software company, and when it comes to VDI, we license by the users that are using it. So it doesn't matter how much hardware you need to do it. So if you need X number of processor cores and X amount of flash in order to make all this happen, we're only licensing by the number of users. So as you can see in scenario one, if you're 500 users running on a 3-node cluster, great. But if you need 6 nodes because your users are a bit more power users, to us, it's the same exact license. Or if you want to start with 200 licenses now and then add 300 later, again, we are just purely based on the number of users. So it makes that model easy. And if you also want to then move out to the cloud one day, right? So if you know that you want to take these same exact users, bridge the gap and burst out the public cloud, it's the same license for us. So the actual underlying hardware does not matter to us. And this one is absolutely huge. And this one, I would say, almost is the reason why I joined Nutanix. So prior to Nutanix, I spent 6 years at Citrix. And as I said earlier, my whole career has been Citrix. Now, what I did is when I was at Citrix, I was a sales engineer. And I did a lot of proof of concepts for customers. So I'd walk in and they said they want to kick the tires with Citrix. They want to know what this looks like for their users. So they'd ask me, what kind of hardware do I need to buy to do a 100-user proof of concept? But knowing that I want to one day go to 2,000 users. So what I would tell them is what you buy for 100 users is not even close to what you buy for 2,000 users. So this is prior to Nutanix. So the challenge was, yeah, you go out and buy a couple servers, you buy some storage, but you're going to have to pretty much throw all that away for the proof of concept because it doesn't easily scale to go from 100 users to 2,000 users. Well, enter Nutanix, right? Because now we are node-based infrastructure. So that's why, early, with Nutanix, when I was at Citrix, I partnered with them right away because I could start with just a little 3-node cluster of Nutanix, do a proof of concept for a customer, have them love Citrix, love Nutanix, and then that same exact 3-node cluster can then become a 20-node cluster if you want it to be. So it's just easy scaling. You just drop nodes in, the cluster expands. This is the biggest part about Nutanix. And the other good thing is that not every one of the nodes in the cluster has to be created equal. And that's a major differentiator between us and the other HCI players out there. So, there's definitely times in a VDI environment that, you may have 80% of your users are what's called kind of task-based users, right? They're using Office, they're using like a browser, but you may have some powered users that want, say, a GPU. Well, within our cluster, we can have kind of regular nodes for kind of like your 80% users, but then we can have these scaled up nodes that have a GPU built into them to give, extra horsepower to those power users. So really what makes us different out there in the market. And I'm still kind of glancing over for questions. So yeah, don't be shy. Ask questions if you like. So this one, I know this is a busy slide, and actually kind of tossed back and forth if I wanted to put this in here, but this is a major differentiator of Nutanix. So as Justin said earlier, the biggest thing to make a VDI project fail is the user experience. So I used to always say back when I was a consultant, if I can't deliver the same or better experience that they get from their physical desktop, from their physical laptop, then the project's going to fail. And one of the biggest problems with a virtual desktop is that virtual machine that's running on a physical server, it has direct access to the CPU, it has direct access to RAM, so all is well there. But in a non-Nutanix or non-hyperconverged environment, that hard drive, the actual virtual hard drive, is hops away. It's sitting on some shared storage. You have to traverse some kind of a storage fabric. It might be 2 or 3 hops. So the essential disk performance became the #1 bottleneck for every virtual desktop project that I was involved in. It was really almost never processor or RAM because that's easy to fix. So what Nutanix does, which is really interesting, is that in a virtual desktop environment, it's all about creating a master image. So you may have one master, say Windows 10 image that has all your applications on it. Maybe you have 2 or 3 master images based on user profiles, but that master image in a traditional virtual desktop environment, it sits somewhere on physical storage. And that's usually a separate physical storage. And all these desktops, whether it's 500, whether it's 2000, they're all hitting the same exact blocks of data to read this master image. So this becomes an instant bottleneck. But with Nutanix, what we do is we automatically, like under the covers, without even checking a box or anything, we see that there is one single image that a whole bunch of VMs are all accessing. We automatically take that image and we copy it to every single node in the cluster. So what that means is every time the VM or the user, living inside Windows 10 goes to read a block of data, they're reading it locally from that server. They're reading this at bus speed. So essentially, you are now delivering them the equivalent of their physical machine, equivalent of a laptop, but as a virtual desktop, because that last little bit of their hard drive being hops away goes away. So this is a huge component of Nutanix, and this is unique to us. Another great thing, and kind of going back to my consulting days, so going through a project of a virtual desktop, the number one spot that these projects would fail was what I mentioned very first, which was scaling, right? So if the scaling wasn't there, you didn't properly size your storage environment, your compute, and all that, the whole thing would fail. But if all that was great, then the next thing that caused things to fail was around profiles. So, and what this translates to is user login time. So if users have to log into the system, walk away and get a cup of coffee and come back, that's a problem. And I've seen it, right? So back when I was a consultant, I did support the VA a lot. And so it was not uncommon to have 10-minute logon times at the VA. It was very painful. But a lot of this comes down to the file server, right? So people tend to think about the infrastructure for VDI and they build all this out, but then they forget that ultimately, if you're doing profiles, there's probably a Windows file server sitting out there or some NAS sitting out there that is going to get overloaded because now you've got thousands or hundreds or thousands of users all hitting the same exact file server to then load their profiles. So huge problem. But with Nutanix, what we do is we have built-in file services to our cluster. So just like public cloud can do one click to have a file server, we can do a single click to have a file server on this infrastructure. But what that means is that file server is now sitting on the same exact infrastructure as the virtual desktops. So there's no hops, everything's just happening right there. It also, by default, when we spin up a file server, we spin up at a minimum 3 file servers that act as one. So my analogy is not the best analogy because this actually does not work in the real world, but it's like having a 1-cylinder engine car or a 3-cylinder engine car, which I know does not really exist. But ultimately, you have 3 kind of heads acting as one, and it's built right into the same infrastructure, so the same console, all that. So we have customers that have just gone with Nutanix purely for the file services of virtual desktop, right? Because that has been their bottleneck. Another thing that people tend to really use as an afterthought for virtual desktop is the security of this. Because ultimately what you're doing when you do VDI is you're bringing users' desktops into the data center. And usually there's a huge divide between users and the data center. But in the VDI world, you're opening the door and letting them in your data center. So the traditional approach to this has been, okay, I'm going to create a firewall. I'm going to do this by VLANs, right? So I have all these desktops in one VLAN. Everything they do has to traverse through a firewall, even internally, and then decide what they can get to. But that also does create a bit of a performance bottleneck because now all traffic has to get routed through a firewall before it can even get to where it goes, but also just becomes kind of a management nightmare. And it's also not as granular as it could be. But with Nutanix, what we can do is we have policies built right into our solution. So built right into our hypervisor. So this is at the hypervisor level. You can create rules and you can say, these desktops can only do these ports and protocols going to these servers. And it's very granular, and it can even get down to the user level, meaning that you could have one virtual desktop, say desktop 1, and when user A logs into it, they get one set of rules, but user B might be an admin, they get a different set of rules. So really granular. It's a very visual thing too, which is very nice, right? So as you dive into our console, what this looks like is ultimately very graphical, very visual. You see the desktops, you see the flow of traffic, and before you hit apply, you can see what's getting ready to happen. It's a really easy tool to use, which is nice. Now, the other thing that I touched on earlier is, spanning into public cloud, right? So we're seeing more and more of this in the virtual desktop world, and especially with COVID, right? So with this, pandemic going on, there's a lot of people that are in a situation that they had to go work from home overnight, which was not easy for everyone, to go procure new hardware to build out a virtual desktop solution. If you're doing kind of a non-Nutanix solution, like I said earlier, it's weeks to get this stuff up and running. Most projects I was involved with before Nutanix was actually months to get the thing up and running. So not easy. But now you can span into the public cloud. And if you're using, namely Citrix as your virtual desktop solution, it's easy for us to do what we call clusters of Nutanix, where we're taking our software, and because we are hardware agnostic, we're also cloud agnostic. So our software can run in AWS, it can run inside Azure, it can run inside GCP. And then now you can spin up workloads. So if you're sitting, using the console of Citrix, it's just a matter of pointing and saying, I want 100 desktops to be on premises, but I want 50 to be in the cloud. And the user perspective, it looks the same, but you're bursting into the cloud. All right, so I'll kind of ask again if there's any questions about kind of traditional VDI on top of Nutanix as we get ready to move into desktop as a service. I don't see anything in the chat window, but again, feel free to ask. This is a topic that I know and love very, very well. All right, so moving into desktop as a service. So Nutanix has a unique offering called Frame. And there's a lot of components to Frame, and it is different than a Citrix, different than a Horizon View from VMware. So for one, the way that desktops and apps are delivered, it's just running through a browser. In order to get up and running, it's extremely easy. I mean, you're talking about hours now instead of even days, weeks, or months, right? So super easy. And the fact that this is a SaaS offering, right? So, a big part of running a virtual desktop environment is always making sure that your backend components are up to date. So, your broker servers of Citrix or your broker servers of Horizon View, making sure that they're on the latest software. And then also, get into that true hybrid cloud, right? Where, you do want to span both public cloud on premises. That's what Frame allows you to do seamlessly from one single console. So as I said about the way that this is delivered, I mean, it's just with a browser. So any modern browser, you point to it and, there you go. And just as, Justin said earlier about the data sovereignty issue, this is where you're now delivering a virtual desktop inside of a browser, and you can control what the user can do. You can control if they can download files from the environment. You can control if they can do copy and paste. You can control if they print, all that's, very controllable and accessed from any browser, right? And I mean, today, every single device has an HTML5 browser. So whether it's a tablet device, a Chromebook, whatever it is, this allows any user to work from home. In terms of ease and onboarding with Frame, so ultimately, because Frame is a SaaS offering, the infrastructure for Frame is already built. There's nothing to do there. So ultimately, once you decide you like Frame and you move forward with Frame, you get access to the Frame console, and that's just a web page that's managed by Nutanix. From there, you pick, where do I want to deploy my desktops? Do I want them to be in Azure, AWS, on premises, a mixture of all of it, right? I mean, it doesn't matter to us. And also where, right? So maybe you have some users that are sitting on the East Coast of the US, you've got some that are sitting in the Midwest. You can pick a data center that's the closest to them. And again, whether that's on premises, whether that's in the cloud. The next step is, how do you want to authenticate the users? So just, simple like SAML2 type authentication. So very easy, couple clicks away. And if you're using just, Microsoft AD, it's easy to add that. At Nutanix, internal, we're big users of Okta. So very simple to integrate the authentication piece to it. Then it just comes down to install your apps into what we call our sandbox. So the sandbox is just a generic, Windows 10, type image, and you just pick the apps that you want to install in there. And then if you do want to connect any kind of external file services, be it, OneDrive or Box or, all those, that's an option as well. And then that's it. You just publish it to the users. So we've had people that have just been amazingly surprised at how easy this is to do, even from a proof of concept standpoint, to just say, hey, I want to kind of, use Frame for a bit. It's fast. And because I'm actually in the, Baltimore, Maryland area, one of our kind of flagship customers, it's not a federal or tribal customer in this case, but the Maryland State Lottery. So They, right when the pandemic hit, they had a need to quickly send a lot of people home and work from home. They had Frame up and running, fully delivered to their users over a weekend. So they were able to get all this up and running and, fully install their apps, integrate it with their environment in a weekend. So huge win for them. It's a huge use case for us. And then, yeah, as I said earlier, I mean, Frame is, not software that you have to load and configure and work with, right? So, again, back when I was a consultant at Citrix, that was a big part of it, is that you had to know, okay, based on this many users, I need to make sure I have this many broker servers, and I need to make sure I have this many, front end servers that are talking to the internet. All that goes away, right? Because now all that is managed by Nutanix. It is a service from Nutanix. And the best part is that where the desktops actually live is up to you. So they can live, again, Azure AWS. They can even live in the government regions of Azure AWS. So I believe we have some people from IHS on the call that, I'm sure that they want to be in a FedRAMP data center. We already support that today. Or if you just want your desktops to be on premises. And if they're on premises, then that means no data is ever outside of your control, outside of your boundary. So ultimately, the desktops are living inside your data center. The only thing that would be, managed by Nutanix would be the, console of this. It's just like the brokering. So essentially, user just logs into a front end web page that would be hosted by Nutanix. But as soon as they launch a desktop, that desktop could be 100% on premises. And then, yeah, so what we're seeing is that, people really are doing multi-cloud. So, we're seeing a huge amount of people doing, on-prem with Nutanix. Azure has just become a real up and coming, public cloud solution. So yeah, we are just seeing a lot of a multi-cloud type thing, and it's all about making it easy, and it's also about making it real. So there's a lot of kind of software vendors that talk about multi-cloud, but it's not really multi-cloud. It's hey, we support AWS, but we kind of support Azure, or vice versa. And in our case, where you put the desktops is just a drop-down box. It doesn't matter to us. So yeah, just to kind of summarize, the desktop as a service side of this, kind of why Frame. To us, it's the multi-cloud solution. It's that Frame was also built as cloud native. So the history of Frame was it started in the cloud day one. Unlike the other major players out there, Citrix and VMware, they're just now starting to move to cloud solutions. So they're trying to kind of back their way into it. They've always been this monolithic, on-premises solution. They're trying to get their way to the cloud. We're the other way, right? We started in the cloud day one, and we also support the on-premises side. And then actually from a use case, and Justin, I don't know if you want to take this over, but I just want to toss one use case in here that, just because it does fall into tribal gaming type world, if you will. I guess more gaming than anything else, but just a reference customer that we have that is doing this for critical gaming management. So I'm sure the people that are part of tribal and part of the gaming world know how important this is to be up and running. So they're certainly trusting Nutanix to be their solution to deliver a virtual desktop environment.
Yep, and we don't have any public cases just yet, but we are utilizing, obviously, traditional VDI. We have quite a few customers in the tribal space using Nutanix as the infrastructure platform for that, and then your traditional VDI solutions like Citrix and Horizon View from VMware. And then also within the last, 6 to 9 months, we've seen a pretty large increase in customers in the tribal space who are starting to adopt the desktop as a service model with Frame. So we've had some really, really good success in tribal government, tribal casinos, tribal healthcare, all kind of looking at Frame or have adopted Frame as a mechanism to provide end user access. And then real quick, let Bill just show it real fast. I just wanted to cover some upcoming events. So this session is part of a larger series that we are doing on the tribal team at Nutanix. So this is the Work from Anywhere Solutions for Tribes. And then on January 28th, we're doing an Embracing Zero Trust Security Strategies. And again, really focusing in on some of the challenges that Native American tribes in tribal healthcare and IHS are having around security and ransomware attacks. we'll talk in that session about how Nutanix, our infrastructure, and kind of the portions of Nutanix that we have that really assist organizations with kind of embracing that zero trust strategy, and then making it easy to implement. And then the last session will be more based on disaster recovery, and also our clusters product that we talked a little bit about briefly in the beginning of this deck, running that hybrid to cloud approach, also having a hybrid kind of DR strategy. So those are the next couple sessions for this Tribal Innovation Series. That last one we will actually be changing the date of. It's currently scheduled for February 3rd. And the reason why we're changing that actually is because we are also sponsoring regional events from Tribal Hub. If you're not familiar with Tribal Hub, or your organization isn't kind of tuned in with what Tribal Hub and TribalNet do, you may recognize TribalNet as kind of the annual conference that Tribal Hub puts on. I would highly suggest people get in touch. It's a great place for you to get information on what your peers are doing and see what's kind of what technologies or challenges are affecting the tribal space. We are going to be doing the Southwest region on February 2nd and 3rd, California on the 9th and 10th, and then the Central region on the 18th and 19th. And then the other, regional events, we'll be also sponsoring those as they come up for that. So again, highly recommend getting dialed in with Tribal Hub. Also, we would love to see you guys at these regional events if, your tribe is from those areas. And again, it's a good place to just kind of mingle, I guess, virtually, as I'm sure everybody's tired of, with your peers in the tribal space. So I don't know, does anybody have any questions? If not, I'm gonna just let Bill kind of close this out, which is showing a quick demo of what Frame looks like. All right, I don't see any questions in chat or anybody unmuting their mic. So Bill, go ahead and take it away, sir.
Yeah, let me make sure, let's see, are you able to see my screen okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, excellent. So yeah, this is what the end user side of Frame looks like. So once you authenticate, and I didn't show that part, but once you authenticate and put in your credentials that tie back to whatever you use as authentication, again, Active Directory, any kind of SAML2 type provider, you're presented with this. Now, because I have a lot of environments out there, when I click this, I get a whole bunch of different what we call launch pads. So I can go to one that has applications. So, this is a very basic, demo environment, but this could have Word, Excel, PowerPoint, mission critical apps to you. Or a lot of people like to just get to a desktop, right? So I can just launch an actual desktop. So if I click this now, and as you can see, I'm running this just inside of a browser, right? So I'm just using, actually I'm using Edge. So I'm kind of trying out Edge for the first time. But when I connect in here, this is going to just start a session. So it's going to connect me to a virtual desktop. This happens to be running in AWS. So this is a virtual desktop in the public cloud. But within moments, I'm already hooked right into a desktop. And this looks like any other desktop, right? I mean, it's just a Windows 10 desktop with whatever applications you would want loaded in there. And then, and also just like some nice little benchmarks, you can always see what your latency is, things like that, from a user side. Now, the other thing about this is that this desktop, and I thought there was a way that I could easily, let me close this. Let me close this session down and get back here. I don't have available, but what's interesting is that you can deliver different types of desktops to the user. So for example, the one that I was connected into was actually a 4 gig, so 4 gigs of RAM desktop coming from AWS. If it's a power user, you can deliver them an 8 gig desktop or a 16 gig desktop, or even GPUs if you want. So all that's absolutely available. From a management side, I'm going to go now to show what the admin would see. So the users wouldn't get access to this dashboard, but this dashboard just shows you what it's like to control Frame. And again, there's nothing you have to install in your environment, no spinning up the servers of Citrix, just nice and easy. But you can see just from a summary standpoint, I'm running this out of AWS. This is running in the Northern Virginia data center of AWS, so close to me in Maryland. But the other important part to see here is what we call the sandbox. And so because this is coming out of AWS, the sandbox just goes into the marketplace of AWS and delivers the current Windows 10 image that's inside the marketplace. That's your starting point. And then you can power this thing on, and that's where you install your application. So if you've done virtual desktop before, think of this as like your gold master image. So you log in here, you install all your applications, configure them the way you do all your custom settings that you would do on kind of any desktop in your environment. And then after that, you just publish it, and you publish it to the amount of desktops that are out there. The way we control the number of desktops is we do this thing called capacity. So capacity, and as I was saying earlier, here's the 4 gig option, here's an 8 gig option, 16 gig. You can even get into the pros with the GPUs. But if I'm looking at the 4 gig, here's where I can control the number of instances. So I can say, I only want to have 50 of these desktops up and running, or I always want a buffer instance, meaning as soon as a user logs in, it's going to power another one up. Because if you are running this in public cloud, you want to have things powered down as much as possible. Because ultimately, with public cloud, storage is very, very cheap to pay for kind of by the hour, by the day. It's compute. Compute is where you spend the money. So that's where we have this whole setup where you can say, okay, this hour to this hour, I want X number of desktops, powered up, or I want my buffer instance to be 1 or 2. Again, meaning as soon as a user logs in, it's just going to power up another one to make sure that it's ready and there to go for the user. But maybe on the weekends, you say, I'm just going to power everything down. Well, what that means is not that the user can't get in. It just means they have to wait for the power up. So if a user does want to log in during off hours, they click desktop and they'll just kind of see a waiting for instance to power up. And it's not a long time. You're talking about less than a minute, but they'll wait for that desktop power up and then they'll go ahead and log in. And then from here, we can always see status of what's going on. So I can look at the desktops I have out there, what's running. And again, this can be on premises, this can be inside public cloud, it doesn't matter to us. And then the last thing I want to show you is the concept we have called launch pads. So earlier when I logged in and I showed you I had access to all these different environments, here's where we create that. So you could have a launch pad, say for HR users, and this launch pad could have a set of applications there. And then you can create another launch pad, and this can be like finance users, right? And then you can add this launch pad, and then you can decide what applications do I want all the finance users to have, right? So I can manage the applications right here, and I can say, okay, if you're a finance user, I want you to have Internet Explorer. But yeah, and then you control this by user access. So when users log in, they see the launch pads that have been assigned to them. So very easy. And that's what Frame was meant to be. It was meant to be very easy to stand up, very easy to get up and running. So I know we're kind of at the end of our time here. We only have 1 more minute. So just wanted to make sure that there weren't any kind of final questions before Justin closes this out.
No. All right. Well, I do appreciate everybody taking the time. Again, please, check out the Tribal Hub regional events in your area, and then also the upcoming Tribal Innovation Series on Zero Trust, and the other one on disaster recovery that's coming after that. I do appreciate you all joining us today, and we look forward to having more in-depth conversations if any of this was interesting. Take care.
Thank you.